The chance of a cyber attack on America's power grid is high, and the nation is ill prepared to face the catastrophic consequences, writes Ted Koppel in his recently released book, Lights Out. Dave McCann visited with Koppel about that threat and why he believes Mormons are the most prepared to handle it.
What did you know about the Mormons before you started researching this book?
Very, very little. Very little.
And now that your book is done?
Yeah, a lot more. I would not presume to say anything about the faith. I don't know a great deal about the faith, but I have learned a fair amount about the church's organizational structure. I've learned a fair amount about the level of preparation for disaster, whether it be a small personal disaster like a wage earner losing his job, or a massive disaster like an earthquake. And I must say, I think the organizational structure, together with the way that families operate and the way that neighborhoods operate together, is probably the smartest thing I've seen in terms of being ready for the worst.
3 chapters in your book, toward the end, are focused on what you learned about the church and its preparations. So let's go on that tour and tell me your impressions. Let's start with the pasta plant.
Pretty impressive. I hope you've read the book more recently than I have. And I forget, but it was some extraordinary sum, like $8 or $10 million for this beautiful Italian pasta machine. And the pasta is just sort of one leg of the food process in which the church engages. The apiaries with the bees and the honey, and the couple of thousand acres of farmland where their silage is grown for the thousands of cattle and heifers which ultimately go into the meat production, but initially go into the dairy and other production. It was just bigger, more extensive, more well thought through, more interconnected than anything I could have imagined. The only thing I can say in all fairness is that those within the church hierarchy who decided that I needed to come out here to fully understand it were absolutely right.
What can the federal government learn from how the LDS Church institutes welfare?
I think what the federal government needs to learn from the church is that a top-to-bottom and bottom-up organization to deal with however large a crisis may be becomes almost essential. And I think the only way ultimately that Americans are going to be able to survive something like a cyber attack on a power grid is if there is collaboration, if there is planning, if we understand that this is not a partisan issue, this is not a question of whether you're a liberal or a conservative, Republican or Democrat, Mormon, Jew or Catholic, makes no difference. In that particular instance, it's something that has to be discussed. It's something that requires thoughtful preparation, and to the degree that we may still have a year or 2 or more before it happens, we need to take advantage of that.
We are not short of intelligent people in the world.
No, we're not.
Why isn't anyone talking about this?
Well, I think people are beginning to. Yeah. But as Tom Ridge, who was the first Secretary of Homeland Security, told me, he said, we are a reactive society. Right. We're not a preemptive society. In the wake of something like 9/11, take a look at everything we've done. All the lives expended, all the money expended, 7,000 or 8,000 soldiers, men and women, killed, hundreds of thousands of people, Iraqis and Americans terribly wounded, $3 trillion expended. The establishment of organizations like the Department of Homeland Security and the TSA. The TSA has 55,000 employees, has expended $100 billion over the last 11 years. And yet, when the Department of Homeland Security ran a security check on the TSA security points at airports around the country, They found that they were able to smuggle fake bombs, fake weapons, ammunition through 95% of the time. That's not a very good expenditure of $100 billion. If we put $100 billion into durable food supplies available for any crisis, but in government warehouses that can be distributed anywhere in the country, that would be a far better expenditure. But that would require doing something in anticipation of a disaster. We're not there yet.
How is your food storage?
It's significantly more than it was when I came out here the first time.
You can make it a few months?
I can make it a few months.
And then what do you take to your kids and grandkids from what you learned researching this?
I have made sure that they also have an adequate supply of food, and I have made sure that they on their own will get an adequate supply of water. And beyond that, my kids are all in their 40s and 50s. They're on their own.
They're still listening to Dad, though,
They're
right?
still listening to Dad as long as Dad buys the food. Yes.
Do you miss when there's a big news day?
No.
Do you miss being in there?
No.
Not at all?
No. I mean, I did it for 50 years. You know, there comes a point in life when it's okay. It's all right. I mean, there are stories I would like to do. But, you know, covering the day-to-day crises, no.
You've covered so many things.
Mm-hmm.
The one moment in your career where you just sat there and thought, how is Ted Koppel sitting right here?
When the Soviet Empire ended, I was sitting in Mikhail Gorbachev's office in the Kremlin, across the desk from him as he was saying goodbye to George H.W. Bush. I was there in his office when the Soviet flag came down over the Kremlin, presumably for the last time, and the Russian flag went up. And the notion, what am I doing here, certainly crossed my mind. That was a great moment.
Lights Out is already a New York Times bestseller and is available where most books are sold.